Good evening, I'm Ian Hanomansing. Tonight, Manitoba's so-called spring deals another brutal blow.
It looks daunting, it looks overwhelming. Farmers are phoning and saying our fields are full of water.
Rain, flooding, and more snow across southwestern Manitoba, and why the province's soggy season could get even worse. Also tonight, Ukrainians mark Easter among the reminders of war, prayers for peace and safety.
I had a life in my city and I don't have this life now.
The COVID crackdown in Shanghai and the rising frustration that's leaking out online. Plus, making clothing out of old food waste and the other creative ways Canadians are trying to save the planet.
It's absolutely an obsession for us.
There is this doom and gloom narrative around the environment, and I think that it's so important to turn that around.
This is The National. It is an anxious Sunday night for a lot of people in Manitoba. There's already significant flooding in some areas, and residents are being warned more could be on the way. People being asked to stay away from waterways because, as you can see, they are high after a deluge of rain this weekend. And it wasn't just rain that fell. Some places are dealing with snow and a lot of it. Sam Sampson shows us the damage already done and the residents bracing for the days ahead.
All over southern Manitoba are lakes where there should be fields.
It looks daunting, it looks overwhelming. Farmers are phoning and saying our fields are full of water.
These drainage creeks that keep the town of Morris dry are overflowing. About 15 roads are closed. The Reeve is asking people to use less water so the town's sewer system doesn't flood. Last year, this area faced drought. Now, this is the other extreme.
We wanted cold weather, and we have cold weather, but now it's time for spring to arrive. It's time for the conditions to dry up.
The ground is saturated after 5 weeks of snow and rain, prompting flood warnings to go out Sunday all along the Red River from the U.S. border to just south of Winnipeg. In St. Adolphe, workers spent the day building a dike across a highway to protect the community as water rose fast.
Look at this. They say yesterday this was completely dry, and they say the water rose 6 feet in 14 hours, a level they say is unprecedented.
Storms cut out power for more than 15,000 Manitobans on Sunday. In western Manitoba, the storm didn't bring rain, but 50 centimeters of snow in the past 2 days.
May long weekend, we have a bunch of guests supposedly coming. They can just bring their ice fishing rods.
Back in the rain zone, sandbags are a hot commodity. East St. Paul, just north of Winnipeg, ran out. This homeowner hopes the water doesn't get any closer to his house.
That's scary because you don't expect that this would ever happen. And even when we knew that the rain and the snow was coming, we didn't anticipate we would have to be getting sandbags.
The storm has prompted the province to reopen the Red River floodway to divert the rising water away from the city of Winnipeg. They weren't expecting to do that until next week, but the storm had other plans.
Sam, you're out by the Red River now, and what do we know about what the days ahead may look like?
Well, first of all, Ian, the winds that are whipping us around here in Winnipeg, they got up to 80 kilometers an hour at one point here. They will die down. As far as the temperature goes, it'll hover around 0 in southern Manitoba for the next few days. That's good news, Ian, actually, because that will temporarily slow down the melting and the runoff into the river. But warmer days are coming, and so the Red River and others will continue to rise. Now, flood forecasters in North Dakota suggest that the levels of the rivers could crest around 5 feet below 1997 levels, otherwise known as the flood of the century. So we got a ways to go until we're in the clear here in Manitoba. Ian?
I remember that year well. Sam, thank you very much. A Ukrainian official says the U.S. Defense Secretary and the Secretary of State met with the country's president in person tonight, the highest-ranking American delegation to do that since Russia's invasion began exactly 2 months ago. Today, Ukrainians spent Orthodox Easter praying for peace and preparing for what the war will bring next. Near Kharkiv, bullets come before blessings on the battlefield. But if Russian attacks in Ukraine's east have intensified, so have signs of Western support for Kyiv. In Lviv, David Common found a Ukrainian Easter marked by both suffering and resilience.
As Ukraine celebrates Easter, there is a craving for normalcy. But the signs of war abound. Holy statues cushioned against attack. Doves of peace mingling with spent weapons and images of the dead. Among the young families, few fathers. 2 months to the day since the conflict erupted, they are needed in battle instead. Russia continues to pound Ukrainian targets, but its soldiers have only gained minimal ground, repelled by Western-donated weapons in the hands of Ukrainian defenders. Civilian buildings have been hit through the weekend, this strike in Odessa, killing at least 8, including a young mom and her daughter. In Mariupol, Russian-backed forces handed out food, accepted by people who those same forces had surrounded and starved for nearly 2 months. The warring nations marked Easter this weekend. Vladimir Putin seen praying, the Russian Orthodox Church, a strong backer of his invasion. In Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky appeared in a highly produced and defiant video. You can destroy walls, he says, but you can't break the foundation of the spirit. Hope is far from lost. This Easter picnic for dozens among the 12 million who fled their homes. I miss Sonia, my cat, 5-year-old Kira tells us. She and her parents normally live just 50 kilometers from the Russian border. They've been forced out.
I was walking the street and the bombing began.
Liza Klemenkova was home alone when the war began. She's now living in a hostel, far from everyone she knows.
It's quite difficult to understand that I had a life in my city and I don't have this life now.
Easter may be a time of rebirth, but Ukraine is fighting for its life. Still, there can be joy here, and hope this will end somehow soon. David Common, CBC News, Lviv.
And Canada's Ukrainian community marked Easter today. And after 2 years of COVID and now the war in Ukraine, there was a large turnout in Edmonton. So many came that Easter baskets were blessed outdoors. The mood both joyful and solemn.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it's hard to stand in there.
Yeah, you have to have a heart, and I think most humans do, but this scenario is just...
Among those attending, some Ukrainian refugees who had recently arrived with the support of members of the local community. 2 months into this war, many Western countries are wrestling with a tough question. What should they be doing to try to end the conflict? Here's Travis Danraj.
I would not sit at the same table as Sergei Lavrov.
A strong statement from Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs speaking on Rosemary Barton Live. She says she will not engage in direct talks with her Russian counterpart.
I believe in making sure that there can be peace talks, but the role of Canada right now is to support Ukraine.
Earlier this week in Washington, Chrystia Freeland joined allies, including the U.S. and U.K., walking out of a G20 meeting in protest to Russia's membership. Still, after 2 months, isolating Russia diplomatically and financially has not moved the needle.
Russia regards basically Canada and other Western countries as waging a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine.
As the West continues to arm Ukrainian soldiers, a push to re-establish embassies, including Canada's in Kyiv, could further inflame tensions with the Kremlin.
This is an open war in the center of Europe.
U.S. Navy veteran Malcolm Nance was so compelled to help, he's one of thousands who have traveled to Ukraine to help in the fight against Russia.
The Russian force, and they're not an army, they're a force who drink, rape, and murder, they are taking out their entire aggression mainly on the civilians, not on the army.
There are now mounting reports of sexual violence, and as the fighting rages on, Canada is pledging to raise the issue with the G7, plus work with the International Criminal Court and other institutions to document and investigate allegations.
Women are used and children are used as weapons of war. We know that sexual violence is a lasting trauma.
2 months in, Western efforts have managed to put pressure on Russia militarily and financially, what countries like Canada have not been able to do, stop a war which takes lives every day. Travis Damraj, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is among the leaders congratulating Emmanuel Macron. He has done something no French president has done for 20 years, win a second term, and he did so handily over his rival Marine Le Pen. But as Karen Paul shows us, Macron is still facing challenges.
At this cultural center in Paris, people crowded in for a pint of beer and a serving of politics. With that announcement, this whole crowd exhaled. There was no big upset, no come-from-behind victory from the far right.
If we had another result, it would have been a real drama, I would say, for our values, for the image of our country internationally and economically, of course.
In his acceptance speech, Emmanuel Macron acknowledged how many people voted for him to block Marine Le Pen and how much anger there is. I am the custodian of their sense of duty and attachment to the Republic, he said, adding he will respond to them. Le Pen moderated her more controversial positions, focusing on affordability. As she conceded, she said today's vote is still a resounding victory because so many people voted for change. She vowed to keep fighting in June's legislative election.
Vive la République, vive la France!
This analyst says Macron's win is important domestically and internationally.
It would have been a disaster for a very diverse country like France to have Marine Le Pen as the president, but I think it's absolutely crucial on a European and a foreign policy level. I think that this is really where the death blow would have come.
As dusk fell, protesters gathered across Paris. Some cleared by riot police as the crowds grew. These young people were chanting, "We are here, we are here. Even if Macron doesn't want us here, we are here."
One of the first things Macron will have to do is show those who didn't vote for him that he is listening. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Paris.
A former detainee at Guantanamo Bay is suing the Canadian government for $35 million over its role in his imprisonment and torture.
Came to Canada to seek human rights. Canada threw me under the bus. I'm here on a mission to clear my name once and for all.
Mahamadou Ould Slahi says Canadian authorities gave the U.S. false information over his short time as a permanent resident in Montreal, leading to his 2002 arrest and subsequent torture. He spent 14 years in Guantanamo before his release without charge in 2016. Responding to CBC News, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, says it won't comment because the case is still before the court. Let's turn to China now, where officials are redefining the term strict COVID lockdown, especially in Shanghai, where 12 new COVID-related deaths were reported today. Millions remain confined to their homes there, even discouraged from opening a window. And this weekend, authorities in hazmat suits went even further, literally barricading parts of the city. And as Susanna De Silva shows us, frustration is boiling over.
Streets and entire apartment buildings sealed off. Just the latest measure and latest frustration for Shanghai residents locked down for weeks. That frustration now pouring out on social media. Despite efforts to remove it by Chinese censors, this video continues to circulate, purporting to capture the desperation, some worried about running out of food or what happens if a fire breaks out. While others, like this woman, document their journey to quarantine facilities after testing positive, describing them as chaotic and unnecessary. The city of 25 million has been reporting around 20,000 cases a day. Some are allowed outside, others cannot leave their homes, trying to rely on deliveries and volunteers for food and medication.
What we do know is that people do adapt really well, but we also know that there is a really clear benefit to getting outside in many cases.
Professor Kai Chan looks at the effect just going outside has on people and says many in China may be reaching a tipping point.
We don't understand that thoroughly in terms of how much people can take.
Still, China will not relent on its COVID-0 policy, now ordering mass testing of 3 million people in a Beijing district after reporting just 41 cases, with dozens of other cities under some form of lockdown. China has a relatively low vaccination rate and exclusively uses Chinese-made vaccines, which are less effective against recent variants.
The connection between zero COVID or dynamic zero COVID and economic destabilization is very real. And that's going to put more pressure back on President Xi, but he's in a box. He's in a serious box.
A box with no easy path out for a government that focuses on stability. Susanna da Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
In Japan, at least 10 people are dead after a tour boat sank in rough seas. Search crews are still looking for 16 other people, including 2 children. Officials are investigating why the ship went out in heavy weather. The tour boat company is under scrutiny. It had 2 smaller accidents last year. Nigeria's president says the country has been traumatized after more than 100 people were killed by an explosion at an illegal oil refinery. Poverty in the region has led some to tap into crude oil pipelines and set up risky refining facilities that officials have struggled to shut down. Now to the U.S., where it's not even May and already parts of the country are dealing with devastating wildfires.
We have a longer, more dramatic, and quite frankly, more dangerous, significant fire season ahead of us.
The governor of New Mexico this weekend after more than 200 buildings were destroyed by fast-moving fires. New Mexico is one of the worst affected states, though in Arizona, fires have forced thousands from their homes. And in Nebraska, authorities say wildfires have left 1 person dead and 3 firefighters injured. A new report says Canada is on track for a future of extreme heat, and cities must act fast to adapt to avoid deadly consequences. The report from the University of Waterloo shows the areas most at risk based on projections for 2051 to 2080. These cities and nearby communities are expected to feel the most extreme heat. That would affect more than 17 million people. Farah Morali shows us what can be done now to prepare.
Are you all ready for tree planting? Yeah. Oh, excellent.
At Toronto's Downsview Park, families dig in to plant 100 trees in a program led by Indigenous youth.
In a very urban area like Toronto, it's very hard to kind of find, not forests, but like wilderness and areas that are like this. And for our group especially, it's very important to connect people to the land.
But it's more than just connecting with the land.
It will help the world, the weather, the climate, yeah. It will help the global warming.
While Earth Day events bring out lots of people on a sunny day like this, a new report is shining a light on the future of extreme heat in Canadian cities. It warns of all the weather events linked to climate change, extreme heat is the deadliest.
We now have to think of extreme heat in the same context of flood and fire risk.
The report's author says while mitigating climate change is important, some impacts are inevitable, and it's time to urgently focus on how to adapt.
Through activities like tree planting, cool roofs, painting roofs white, having cool pavements within cities. If we pursue these things aggressively, then we can have a material reduction in reference to the extreme heat felt within cities.
Nearly 600 people died in BC during last year's heat dome, the deadliest extreme weather event in Canadian history.
The heat dome we saw in the summer was a 1 in 1,000 year event, but climate change made that 150 times more likely.
With that, some say the healthcare system needs to be ready too.
Heat exacerbates many chronic conditions, so heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease, diabetes, and it really affects those who are most vulnerable and marginalized the most.
It terrifies me as a parent for what the future is going to be like for these kids.
Back at the park, the event is more than just laying the groundwork for a better future.
It's a natural thing for them to do things like plant trees and be concerned with it.
It's planting awareness, too. Farah Morali, CBC News, Toronto.
We'll have more climate coverage coming up tonight, focusing on Canadians with solutions, including one startup using food scraps to try to create more sustainable clothing. A tribute to hockey legend Guy Lafleur tonight in Montreal at the Canadiens' first home game since news of his death 2 days ago. Fans gave a stirring standing ovation after the team aired a tribute video. Players also wore his number on their jerseys. Lafleur helped the Canadiens win 5 Stanley Cups. He's still the team's all-time leading scorer. Lafleur was also remembered tonight in his hometown of Thurso, Quebec, where residents gathered for a vigil in his honor. Guy Lafleur was 70 years old. He'll be given a Quebec national funeral May 3rd. Before that, there will be 2 days of visitation at Bell Centre. Fans can also share condolences on the Canadiens' website. In fast fashion, trends are hot, then not at hyperspeed, and a lot of it ends up in the landfill.
There is so much stuff, everything from dresses.
Coming up, the Canadiens trying to find unique solutions to the waste caused by fast fashion.
We're essentially creating a more circular alternative to polyester.
Plus, painting a message of awareness.
So they're disappearing, similar to a lot of our environment.
I speak with 2 artists using their canvases to get your attention. But first, the courage, determination, and raw emotion inside a Ukrainian shelter. We're back in a moment.
CBC News, The National, named Canada's best national newscast at the Canadian Screen Awards.
For many Ukrainians, finding some peace and joy is already a challenge this Easter, and for the millions who have fled their homes, it's even more difficult. Ellen Morrow shows us how some have managed to find strength.
The rituals of Easter in the midst of war. Russia's invasion forced these children from their homes. When they've lost so much so young, cherished traditions can matter so much more. Halina, a volunteer, is helping the kids make prusenki, Ukrainian Easter eggs. It will distract them from what is happening in the East, she says. It's very important. Halina needs distraction too. Her heart is in the East, with her son on the front line. The main thing is to stay calm, she says, and be confident that we will win. This is where those children now live, a university-turned-shelter in Lviv. More than 200 people are staying here, families who had normal lives just weeks ago. Yulia Timoshenko fled Kramatorsk with her 3 kids and their dog, Mona. Her husband stayed behind. It's the family's second time fleeing war after fighting first broke out in eastern Ukraine in 2014. We are living in the fog, she says. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. She breaks down, telling us how hard this all is. Her daughter tries to comfort her, but Timoshenko's pain is too deep. There are some 7 million people displaced within Ukraine, while 5 million more have left the country altogether. Most here are Russian-speaking, the same people Vladimir Putin claims he's trying to liberate. 80-year-old Nina Chorna is from the Luhansk region. Her apartment, home for 20 years, has been destroyed. I want peace in the whole world, she says. No war, and for the kids not to suffer. Organizers at this facility don't want us to name it for fear of being targeted by Russia. It, like so many others, is fueled by donations and volunteers.
My help is small, what I can do. But when a lot of people help, we can do a lot of help for people.
For people and their companions, Halina Bilobred escaped the Donetsk region with her cat, Barsik. She could never leave him. We believe our Ukrainian forces will win, she says. We don't want to be on our knees in front of Russia. While the old and young here hold on for that victory, all they can hold on to is each other. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Lviv.
After the break, meet the Canadian entrepreneur pumping big money into conservation projects.
There is this doom and gloom narrative around the environment, and I think that it's so important to turn that around.
The growing role of wealthy philanthropists in preserving the environment, and
we love to blame, the cars and the power companies, but we're not realizing that we're literally wearing fossil fuels.
how an Ontario startup is using food waste to try to tackle the pollution problem of fast fashion. That is next. To mark Earth Week, we've been bringing you stories about the climate crisis and our changing planet. And tonight we're focusing on Canadians who are working on solutions. Stephen D'Souza starts us off with a look at fast fashion and Canadian efforts to disrupt the world of cheap, disposable clothing.
This lab in Waterloo, Ontario is a long way from the runways of Paris and Milan. Here, they're designing something that could disrupt the very fabric of the fashion industry. The company is called Altex. Their goal, turn food waste into clothing.
We're essentially creating a more circular alternative to polyester that's biodegradable, carbon neutral, and re-engineered from food waste.
Exactly what we want to start with, and then we continue to optimize so that we can prepare for the textile applications.
They want to replace polyester, a synthetic that doesn't break down and can leach microplastics into the soil and water.
Like a lot of us don't realize, it's made from fossil fuels. We love to blame, the cars and the power companies and say that that's what's causing the carbon emissions, but we're not realizing that we're literally wearing fossil fuels.
Myra Arshad and Avneet Gotra are high school friends who love fashion but hate its environmental impact. They say fast fashion is the biggest culprit. The latest trends go from runway to retail in record time. The price is low, so is the quality. Clothes meant to be worn a few times, then tossed aside.
I think there was one point in time where I hadn't bought clothing for 2 full years because there's just so much paranoia around what's on the shelf and who's made it and what the materials are made out of. It's absolutely an obsession for us.
It's estimated the clothing and textiles industry is responsible for between 2 to 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than all international flights and global shipping combined. The industry also uses an incredible amount of water, more than 7,500 liters of water to make a typical pair of jeans. Thanks to fast fashion, more clothes than ever are being produced. Forget 4 design seasons. Now companies put out new products every week. All that consumption means a lot more clothes get tossed away. 6% of all municipal waste in the U.S. is from textiles. One estimate says 1 garbage truckload of clothing is burned or put in a landfill every second.
There is so much stuff, everything from dresses.
5, 6, 7, 8.
With social media creating pressure to constantly wear new clothes, it can be hard to keep up.
I feel like right now all the trends are moving so quickly. As soon as you buy one shirt, by next week it's gonna go out of fashion.
It's cheaper for a reason. Like, it's hurting the environment and they don't last long, and then we have to continuously buy new clothing.
Has fast fashion conditioned us to think of clothes as disposable now?
Absolutely. It's like fast food. There's so many parallels, right? It's cheap, really accessible, not that good for you.
About 750 out of the target of 1,000. So
Kelly Drennan is trying to change the way Canadians think about what they wear. She preaches the 7 R's. There's reduce, reuse, recycle, then
there's repurpose, so taking something old and turning it into something new and great, also known as upcycling. Repair, so learn how to sew a hole in the toe of your sock or a button back on a garment, right? And then you've got rental. So for those one-off kind of special occasions, graduation or wedding, you can rent a dress instead of buying it and only wearing it once. You can resell your clothes. And then at the end of the day, our stuff gets recycled.
All right, this is one of the brands we're talking about earlier, Shin.
In this apartment in Winnipeg, Ogasa Ogemwaye sees fast fashion castaways all the time.
It's crazy because a lot of the clothes we get still have name tags on them.
He co-founded Thriftsome, an online thrift store, part out of love of clothing, but also to help stem fashion's environmental impact.
I want to have kids someday, and I know with the rates that fast fashion is going, it's scary to think about what will happen in the future.
His co-founder, Joshua Akom, is finishing an MBA in Edmonton. Growing up in Ghana, he said thrift clothing was an economic necessity. Now he hopes it's the key to helping fashion solve its environmental problems.
Because the whole idea of fast fashion is to get it quick and get rid of it quickly. And so if you buy secondhand clothing, you are slowing down that process of ending up in a landfill.
He's optimistic the small business they're running out of an apartment in Winnipeg can take on the fashion giants.
We are hopeful because this generation cares so much about the planet. It cares so much about where they get their stuff from. And we hope that they will put their money where their heart is.
That hope isn't misplaced. Some shoppers say helping the environment is definitely on trend.
One of my favorite things to do is vintage shop. So by supporting vintage shopping, you're supporting recycled clothing. And just like I said, fashion comes back.
I'd rather have a piece that lasts me a little bit longer and spend a little bit more money on it, knowing I'm going to wear it for the next 5-10 years and it's going to last.
Kelly Drennan says the best place to start a sustainable wardrobe is in your own closet.
You know, we wear 20% of our wardrobe 80% of the time. So basically, you know, 80% of our wardrobe is just sitting there, not getting worn.
And this is a resin, I guess?
Yeah, so this is a polymer resin, correct.
Back in the lab in Waterloo, they're still perfecting the polymers and threads that were once old potatoes and apples. They're hoping to turn this into a wearable prototype in the next 2 years.
Yes, we're tackling polyester as a whole, but through that process, we're just making people more conscious about what they're wearing.
Their hope that they can weave together a solution that can help fashion and the planet. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Waterloo, Ontario.
From the clothes we wear to the land we live on, there are also efforts underway to help protect the Canadian wilderness from development. Lindsay Duncombe shows us how big money donations are helping drive conservation efforts.
Depending on the day in the stock market, Dax De Silva is almost a billionaire. There's lots of ways the tech entrepreneur could spend his money. His latest plan? Buy up land and give it away.
In order to fight climate change, in order to protect species and ecosystems, conservation, we need to have more investment.
De Silva recently donated $14.5 million to the BC Parks Foundation. It used the money to buy this, the French Creek estuary, where tens of thousands of eagles return each year. And this, the Pitt River watershed, home to salmon, grizzlies, and elk. The Parks Foundation says it will ensure neither parcel of land will ever be developed.
These are critical habitats, and we have to start protecting these areas.
Dax De Silva is the founder and CEO of Lightspeed.
De Silva made his multi-millions on a retail point-of-sale system.
Welcome to the Las Piedras River. This is all the new land protected by...
He recently stepped down as CEO of Lightspeed while staying on his chair to focus on his environmental organization, supporting conservation projects in Canada and around the world. De Silva's activism started long before his tech success. In the 90s, a teenage De Silva protested old-growth logging at Clayoquot Sound. Conservation efforts by billionaires go back to the time of the Rockefellers. The oil-rich industrial magnates helped develop much of the U.S. national park system. These days, some of the largest private conservation efforts on the planet are in Chile and Argentina, led by Christine Tompkins and her late husband Douglas. They made a fortune in clothing manufacturing. She was the head of Patagonia, he owned the North Face. Since they started buying land in the 1990s, they have created 13 new national parks and expanded 4 others.
We were foreigners and we were spending a lot of money on huge tracts of land and saying we're going to conserve them, not cut the forest down. And there just wasn't a precedent for that.
It took decades to get local communities and governments on side.
You're confronting a development model and conservation, and they inherently and will always conflict.
Dax De Silva's British Columbia donation was met with skepticism too.
Initially, there was concern, just like I had, that it's involving BC Parks, and oh no, they're going to try and stop us from practicing our traditional ways.
Rick Bailey is an elected band councillor with the Katzie First Nation. The Pitt River watershed is traditional Katzie territory. The First Nation has been working for decades to protect it. It needed reassurances about the De Silva donation.
We will continue to use the land and resources as we always have.
And if it takes someone really rich to make that happen, he's okay with it.
There's more and more of it happening, and I'm happy to see it. We didn't have the money.
De Silva wasn't the only donor to help protect the eagles at French Creek. In addition to his big bucks, the Parks Foundation collected small bucks through a crowdfunding campaign. De Silva wants to inspire others to give what they can.
There is this doom and gloom narrative around the environment, and I think that it's so important to turn that around into a narrative of hope, especially with everything we have to accomplish.
Donations big and small may be just one way to address the huge challenges ahead, but De Silva plans to keep on making them. Saving land and the planet won't come cheap. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Vancouver.
And it's not just tech millionaires trying to make a difference. Artists are also using the forest to send a message.
I just hope it causes people to pause and take a second and maybe reevaluate how they interact with our natural spaces.
The symbol behind his fleeting art is next.
I'm Jamie Poisson, and tomorrow on Front Burner, Conservative leadership candidate Pierre Poilievre has been drawing big crowds with his promise to make Canada the freest country on earth. We'll take you inside one of his rallies. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. As the world marks Earth Week, a challenge is grabbing people's attention. And tonight, we're going to show you a creative attempt to spread the word. Vincent J.F. Huang is an eco-artist based in Taiwan. He's partnered with the country of Tuvalu, a tiny island nation in the South Pacific, at the risk of being overwhelmed by rising sea levels caused by climate change. At the Venice Biennale Art Festival in 2015, he flooded an entire pavilion to make his point. Last year, his work was showcased at the COP26 climate conference. Alex Stewart is an eco-artist in the Fraser Valley, here in BC, creating biodegradable portraits in natural spaces. First of all, to both of you, for the people who are watching who don't know your work, why don't we describe it to them? Vincent, starting with you.
My work is about climate change and Tuvalu. 10 years ago, I visited Tuvalu and I saw a lot of climate crisis things. So I decided to use my professional contemporary art, eco art, to help them to get the more global society to attention their climate crisis.
I'll talk to you a lot more about that in just a moment, but let's bring Alex in now. You're here in British Columbia. And again, let's start as we see some pictures of your work describing your art to our audience.
Okay, so I create surreal and ephemeral portraits on dying stumps and trees using all natural materials that I make in my studio here, from wheat paste to rice paper. And they all disappear within several months of being put into the wild.
Which I guess is part of the message, right? How it disappears. And I guess also part of your art is how people find it. It's not in a gallery. And Alex, I guess sometimes, often, if they see it at all, it's going to be that they stumble upon it.
Yeah, it's all happenstance when people find my work. And I think that's part of the wonder of it and why it has an impact and creates conversation. It's unexpected, and most of the time they're already partially degraded, so they're disappearing, similar to a lot of our environment, right? So it creates this interesting conversation around our own personal impacts.
I mean, I guess your art in a way is a metaphor for climate and climate change, right?
In a way, yeah.
Vincent, by contrast, your art, particularly at the big climate conference, COP, is right there. It's on display. It's in people's faces. And obviously a lot of people at COP who saw your art agree with the message, right? That we have to get serious about climate change. We have to change policies in order to deal with it. But do you think you reached anybody, particularly at that conference, whose minds needed to be maybe changed a little bit?
Yes, because I think that this COP26, there are a lot of dedicated and the NGO and even the global media come to COP26. And my work, I make a huge polar bear sculpture. Those polar bear refugee wear orange life jacket, so looks like a climbing refugee. I always use recycled material to recycled use it become a real sculpture. Especially I met a lot of penguin and polar bear. I would like to metaphor thing. It's like Tuvalu is standing in the climbing frontier, like more and more. I mean, if we don't do more carbon emission cut, it will come to more and more climbing refuge. So because it's a kind of spectacular art. It's because this is first time polar bear and penguin participate the COP. So this kind of spectacular art attract a lot of media, including New York Times, Washington Post, and BBC, CNN. A lot of people talking about the polar bear and where we were going to next.
Yeah, well, and so as you listen to this, Alex, you must be thinking, man, my art is in a whole different space because they're not doing stories about it in the New York Times. It's not at the COP conference, but But what do you hope happens when somebody's out hiking in the woods, a place you like to spend time as well, a place that's so beautiful in British Columbia, and somebody just happens on one of your works of art? What do you hope the impact is?
I just hope it causes people to pause and take a second and maybe reevaluate how they interact with our natural spaces. So many people just like walk by garbage or anything like that out in our natural spaces and assume it's the park ranger's problem or someone else will take care of it. And I would like to see more people taking initiative and participating in beach cleanups and like forest cleanups and everything like that. So I'm hoping that that's something that someone can take away from stumbling onto one of my pieces.
Well, I really appreciate both of you speaking with us this evening, and as I say, to get an artist's perspective on the issue of climate change. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Coming up, goalball athletes return to the courts after the pandemic put a hold on competitive play.
It's been really hard on athletes just not having competition, and competition is what helps make players better.
What it also means for those cheering from the sidelines. Next. For the uninitiated, this is what a game of competitive goalball looks like. It's played by athletes who are blind or visually impaired. Goalball athletes haven't been able to compete on the national level since the start of the pandemic, and their return to the court this weekend in the national championship is our moment.
Goalball is played on a volleyball-sized court, 3 players at each end, and basically it's a game of offense and defense. So you throw the ball, you defend the ball. All the athletes are wearing full blackout eye shades, so there's no visual communication, so everything is by sound. We're impressed with how the athletes have risen, they've been training in isolation, really.
It's been really hard. I'm on athletes just not having competition, and competition is what helps make players better. If we're not competing, then it's hard to keep athletes involved in sport at a younger age.
I'm really excited to be here so that I can see potentially what I could do in the future. It's a sport that I can play and feel comfortable playing with other people like me who have low vision.
It's always good to inspire kids, be a role model, and help bring up the next generation. So when I retire, we have kids to take my spot.
Blair, by the way, who we heard from, was the MVP at these national championships. And obviously this is a sport with a particular purpose. It's part of the Paralympics for people who are visually impaired, but really it's the bigger story about sports, right? How inspiring it is for people who are watching and who are fans, for the people who are playing, and how tough it's been during the pandemic for every sport to not be able to compete the way they used to. That is the National for April 24th. Good night.